In this PowerPoint, we are going to talk about assessment essentials. We are going to be talking about three different types of assessments: diagnostic, formative, and summative. Understanding assessments in special education. Assessments are crucial tools in special education. As stated previously, there are three main types: diagnostic, formative, and summative. Assessments help to track student progress and inform our instruction, and they're essential for creating effective individualized education programs, otherwise known as IEPs. Pre-service teachers must understand both types for successful lesson planning. Let's talk briefly about diagnostic assessments. These help to identify students' current knowledge, skills, and misconceptions. Some types of diagnostic assessments include pre-tests on content and abilities, curriculum-based measures, self-assessments, looking at skills and competencies, brief interviews with students. So this is basically trying to get an idea of where the student is at currently with their skills, as well as any misconceptions that they may have about the skill. Moving on to formative assessments, they are an ongoing evaluation. So the definition of formative assessments are continuous evaluation during the learning process. The purpose of formative assessments is to monitor student learning and provide ongoing feedback. Some examples of formative assessments include observation checklists, exit tickets, quick quizzes, peer assessments, and some of the benefits: they identify areas for improvement. They allow for immediate instructional adjustments because this is something that you are continuously evaluating during the learning process and throughout your lessons. And it enhances student engagement and metacognition because you're engaging the students with the assessment and with assessing them and having them really think about their thinking. Formative assessments can look different depending on what type of environment you're in. If you're in an academic environment, this could be things like exit slips or quick quizzes, could even be peer assessments. If you are in a behavioral environment, this could look like observation checklists. It could even be just observations during activities. It could be reflection journals, question and answer sessions. You could be doing student conferences and giving them feedback. It could be even informal presentations that you have the students do after you have taught what you are wanting to teach. It could also be doing student feedback surveys where they are giving you feedback so that you can see kind of where they're at or how they feel about where they're at. Formative assessments in an adaptive environment could even just look like looking at the data that you are collecting with your learner if you are working one-on-one. It could just be asking your learner yes/no questions. It could be having them choose from a field of 3 or identifying something. It doesn't have to be something that is extremely formal. So how to grade formative assessments? You want to focus on feedback to guide your improvement, or to guide their improvement, excuse me. Use rubrics for clear criteria, especially if you are grading something or you're doing a formative on something that involves writing. Sometimes that can be very hard to objectively assess without a rubric. Make sure that you're providing descriptive feedback to your learners, and that can really look different in all different types of environments. Some students may be able to handle a lot of feedback, a lot of descriptive feedback, could be verbally or written. Other students may just need to be like, yes, you chose 3, good job. So make sure that you're providing descriptive feedback on either what they're doing right or maybe feedback on how they can change what they're doing going forward. You can also encourage self-assessments and peer assessments, and you want to make sure that you are tracking progress and focusing on growth over time with formative assessments. You want to consider the student's participation and their effort when you're thinking about the formative assessments. If it was a lesson where a student maybe wasn't totally engaged, they weren't putting forth a lot of effort, they weren't really participating, then maybe their however you're assessing them may not come out as well as you had intended, or as well as you wanted it to, because they weren't engaged with the lesson that day. And then make sure you're also communicating clearly to your students. So as we talked about on the previous slide, creating rubrics, this is a way that you can grade formative assessments or kind of get an idea of how a student is doing with a certain topic. Writing oftentimes, like I stated, is one where rubrics are easier, makes it easier to objectively assess where a student is at. When you're doing a rubric, when you're writing a rubric or creating a rubric, every score should be defined on the rubric. So for example, on the right here, if you get a 1, that means that the work is displaying that significant intervention or assistance is needed to attain mastery. If you get a 2, that means that the work that the student is displaying, it means that or it's showing that the student is requiring some intervention or assistance to attain mastery. A 3 would show that the work displays that the student requires no intervention or assistance to show mastery. And then a 4 is the work displays that the student exceeds mastery expectations and is able to apply the skill in uninstructed ways. So if we look to the left here, if the goal is to ride a bike by yourself, if we're looking at number 1, they're riding the bike but using training wheels. So they're kind of beginning with the standard. And that kind of correlates to the number 1 that we just spoke about on the right-hand side. If you look at number 2, they're progressing with the standards. So they're pedaling well, they're staying upright, but somebody has to be holding on and giving them a little push. And then 3, achieving the standards. So congratulations, you're successfully riding the bike by yourself. And then 4 would be like, wow, not only are they riding the bike on their own, but they can pop a wheelie, they can jump ramps, they can perform other bike stunts. So really applying skills in uninstructed ways, extending that standard. Another way that we want to think about and assess formative assessments is using the depth of knowledge levels. So we want to build skills with verbs that are on the same depth of knowledge level that our students are at. And there are 4 depth of knowledge levels. Level 1 is recall. Level 2 is where they're like at the skill or concept level. Level 3 is strategic thinking. And then level 4 is extended thinking. So as you make your lesson targets, you can build from level 1 to the desired level in each skill for the standard. So if somebody was at level 1, a teacher might be looking for them to quote the character's dialogue that shows that they are growing up. If another student is at a level 2 in that same class, they might want them to summarize the character's quote that shows that they are growing up. And then if there's another student or group of students in that same class working on that same text, but they're at a level 3, you might have them compare examples of character dialogue to evaluate which character is growing up more. So you can see that those verbs, quote is a verb in level 1, summarize is a verb in level 2, and compare is a verb in level 3. In an adaptive classroom, this might look like everyone is at a level 1, but you might have them working on different levels of verbs in level 1, or maybe they're working on the same verb, but at different levels. So if we're looking at who, what, when, where, why, you might have them, somebody might be identifying all 5, somebody might only be identifying 2, or if you have identify, as a verb, somebody might be verbally identifying, somebody might be identifying by pointing. So there can be different levels within the same level, and that's what it might look like in an adaptive classroom. These are the levels of thinking in Bloom's taxonomy and Webb's depth of knowledge. So Bloom's taxonomy was created in 1956, and then there was a new version that was created in the 90s. And then Webb took this in 2002 and took all 6 of those pieces of Bloom's taxonomy and grouped them into those 4 levels in the depth of knowledge. So this is something that you can access and refer to if you are looking for, if you know your student is at a specific skill level and you're looking for a specific verb in terms of coming up with lesson objectives. Now moving on to summative assessments. These are measuring outcomes. So the definition of a summative assessment is the evaluation at the end of a learning unit or a period. And the purpose is to measure student achievement against standards or benchmarks. So some examples might be like an end of a unit test, a final project, could be standardized tests, portfolio review. And the benefits of a summative assessment, they provide a comprehensive view of student progress. They inform decisions about student placement and how much support they need. They also evaluate effectiveness of instructional strategies. And again, this can look different in all different types of classrooms. So some classrooms might be doing high stakes exams and final exams, could be doing like term papers and projects, portfolios and performances. While in, say, an adaptive environment, this might look like the DLM, dynamic learning maps. Or it could just look like taking all of the IEP goals and objectives and taking data on them to see where the student is currently at. You might not be doing summative assessments a whole lot in an adaptive classroom. So let's look at how to grade summative assessments. You want to establish clear criteria for transparency. You want to make sure that you're using rubrics for consistency, that you're assigning numerical or letter grades. This is something that, when you're grading a summative assessment, this is going to be something that is a little more high stakes. There is going to be a grade attached to it or some sort of number or level. Make sure that you're considering weighting grades appropriately if need be, providing specific and actionable feedback to the learners, ensuring fairness and adherence to policies. When you are grading these summative assessments, making sure that you are being fair and you're adhering to strict grading policies, and then using that assessment data for instructional planning in the future. So here are some key considerations in comparing formative and summative assessments. So the time frame, formative assessments are ongoing throughout instruction, whereas summative assessments are usually at the end of a course or a unit or a year. The purpose for formative assessment is to provide opportunities for students' improvement in real time, whereas summative assessments, it's to evaluate learning outcomes after lessons have concluded. The intention of a formative assessment is understanding progress and pinpointing areas for improvement, whereas the summative assessment is really gauging overall comprehension and labeling achievements. As far as frequency goes, formative assessments are happening regularly, frequent pace, and then summative assessments are just happening occasionally. And then some examples like we talked about, formative assessments would be exit tickets, a think, pair, share, a 1-minute paper, whereas summative assessments would be like a final exam, a standardized test, or an end of unit project. In terms of integrating assessments in lesson planning, you want to make sure that you are aligning assessments with your lesson objectives, your learning goals, IEP goals. You want to make sure that you are using formative assessments to guide daily instruction. You should be having formative assessments within your daily lesson plans. And then you should be planning summative assessments to evaluate their overall progress towards the end of the unit or the course or whatever it may be. You want to make sure that you're incorporating a variety of assessment methods, not only to accommodate diverse needs with your learners, but that also keeps them engaged and keeps them kind of on their toes. And you want to make sure that you're using assessment data to inform future lesson planning and instructional strategies. We don't just give assessments just to give them and have something to do in class. We want to collect valuable data to inform our future planning and any instructional strategies that we want to incorporate with our students. So this is something like checks for understanding. So if at the end of this lesson we were teaching live, these are a couple of different types of formative assessments that I could be doing with you in terms of assessing your understanding of the difference between formative and summative assessments. So I could do a pair share where I could pair you up and you could discuss the differences between formative and summative assessments. I could have you do a quick write listing 3 formative and 3 summative assessments. I could have you do a reflection. So how can assessment data improve your teaching practice? I could also have you doing an exit ticket. So like name one way you'll use formative assessment in your next lesson. These are all examples of some formative assessments that I could be giving you to kind of assess how you are feeling about and your knowledge on assessments after all of this. So in summary, assessment measures if and how students are learning. Diagnostic identifies prior knowledge, formative focuses on ongoing improvement, summative evaluates final project,